Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. In this video, we're going to cover the Toulmin model of argumentation. We're going to talk a little bit about why you might want to use this model, and then we're going to break down the parts of the model. So let's get started. So why would we want to use the Toulmin model? Well, there's two primary reasons. The first reason is that the Toulmin model can help us make sure we're developing strong arguments. Whether you're writing a speech, crafting an essay, making an argument to a boss or a coworker, the Toulmin model can help you ensure that you have the appropriate amount of evidence you need to support your claim and your argument. So it is a visual way for you to know if you're crafting strong arguments or not. The second reason for the Toulmin model is that it helps you assess and evaluate arguments that others use to try to persuade you. In a similar way to how it helps you make arguments, it also can help you visually observe the arguments other folks are using to try to persuade you and assess their quality. Here's the most basic structure of the Toulmin model. As you can tell, in its most basic form, the Toulmin model has three parts: the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning. Now, the claim is just a statement that the speaker wants the audience to accept. It is the assertion the speaker is making that the speaker wants the audience to accept as true by the end of their speech or their advocacy effort. Now, strong arguments also have supporting material and evidence. The speaker should be presenting some form of evidence, data, or supporting material to try to show the audience that their claim is correct. So this also might be referred to as data or grounding, but regardless of what it is called, the kind of basic principle is that claims should be supported with evidence and supporting material. Now, reasoning, also known as the warrant, is the kind of connection between the evidence and the claim. There should be a logical connection that links the evidence to the claim. In other words, right, there should be some kind of reason that the evidence actually shows the claim to be correct in some shape, way, or form. And active audience members are asking themselves that, right? Is the evidence actually sufficient to justify the claim, and should I believe in the claim based off the quality of the evidence? So, for example, let's imagine that you just saw some smoke, or someone else saw some smoke, and they stated, there is a fire. In this case, the evidence is the physical observation of the smoke. The claim, right, is that there is a fire. And so the reasoning process, or that kind of mental leap, that connection, that link, is that smoke is a sign of fire. And if you see smoke, that means there might be fire nearby. One thing you can do to determine how strong your argument is, or to evaluate someone else's argument, is then to model the argument using the Toulmin model. So let's go through an example of that. Here we have a claim that you should brush your teeth at least twice a day. You can literally graph it, right? Draw a circle, draw a box, write the claim in there. Connect that specifically with the evidence. In this case, right, the evidence maybe is that a recent survey showed that a bunch of doctors, 99 out of 100 doctors, believe that you should brush twice a day. You also can then model the reasoning. In this case, right, it's kind of reasoning by expertise, appealing to the authority of those who are experts in their field. And so the reason is that experts in their field are maybe more likely to be correct in the recommendations. And so here, right, you clearly have modeled the argument, you see the parts, and you can decide, right, based off the parts, right, do you believe it's going to be a strong argument, or are you willing to accept the argument? Another strategy you can use is to write your argument in a sentence form, aligning each part of the Toulmin model with a part of the sentence. And this can help you craft perhaps more persuasive arguments as you're trying to develop them. And so in this case, there's like a basic formula. Since C, the reasoning process, A, because B. And so here's an example of what we just looked at, right? Since experts are more likely to form correct judgments, we should brush our teeth twice a day because 99% of doctors recommend doing so. You're making sure each part of the Toulmin model is in your sentence so you can develop and show each part to your audience. Now, the Toulmin model has a few additional parts. The first is the qualifier. The qualifier is an expression of the relative strength of the argument. So, there's times we're not that certain in our argument or our claim, right? We're not 100% sure. And so we want to communicate that to our audience in the interest of honesty and transparency. When we do that, we might say things like, it's likely true, or it's probably true, or it might be true, right? Those words kind of convey how strong we believe our argument is. And so we're being more honest and upfront with our audience about that. So when you see smoke, right, you might not be 100% sure that there's fire. So you might say something like, there is likely a fire because I see smoke. Now, on some occasions, to really craft a strong argument, you need to think of your evidence as becoming a new claim that you need to justify. So let's say that your friend did not see the smoke at all. You're trying to convince them there's a fire and they just don't even believe you that you saw smoke. So you need to persuade them first that there was smoke before you can convince them then that we should be concerned about a fire. So maybe you would have to produce some kind of supporting evidence or material to show that there was smoke. And so maybe you took a picture of that smoke and you can show your friend that smoke. Regardless of how you do that, you might need to think of your evidence, your personal observation of smoke as a new claim that you need to justify to your audience. The next part of the Toulmin model is backing. Now, backing is additional support that you provide in order to support your reasoning process. Sometimes that logical connection between the evidence and the claim just might not be that evident to an audience. And so you, as a persuasive advocate, need to justify and explain that connection to them. For example, let's say someone says, let's go to Mushu Sushi Restaurant because it has great Yelp reviews. Now, in that case, the reasoning process is unstated, and the reasoning or that connection is that Yelp reviews are a sign that it's a good restaurant. In this case, you might need to provide some additional justification for that, for using Yelp reviews as your evidence. And if you explain that justification for why we can use Yelp reviews to know there is a good or bad restaurant nearby, that would be your backing. The final part of the Toulmin model is the rebuttal. Now, the rebuttal is an explicit limitation of the argument that you are presenting to your audience. Like with the qualifier, we want to be honest and transparent with our audience. And so in this case, using the rebuttal allows us to show that we are trustworthy, that we are credible because we know what's going on and we know some of the limitations of our argument. And so that's why we use the rebuttal. Let's go back to the example of the smoke and fire, for example. Let's say, you saw some smoke, so you concluded that there was fire. Now, when you're telling that to a friend or an audience, you might recognize the limitation, that unless the fire department showed up and put out the fire, there would be a fire. And so you're explicitly saying that here are some of the conditions that might happen that means there would not be a fire because of this smoke that I saw. And so you're explaining to the audience some of the limitations of your argument or the ways that your argument might not be true because of other intervening things that are going on. So that is the rebuttal.